All right, DeVincentis. It's a tongue twister of a name.
Yeah, I often skip the N myself. It's DeVincentis. I
DeVincentis.
do it all the time, Zach.
um, I don't feel so bad then if you do it all the time. So you were one of the writers on The People v. O.J. Simpson. You wrote 3 episodes: The Dream Team, Marsha, and Conspiracy Theories. Talk about how you got involved with this show. It's funny that one of the episodes you wrote is The Dream Team, because it feels like that's what this show was, assembling the Dream Team.
Yeah, it was the short version is that I go way back with Brad Simpson and Nina Jacobson. We've worked together in the past, and once they had decided, Scott Alexander and Larry Karaszewski wrote this beautiful pilot, and once they decided to figure out what the rest of the show could be, they called me and asked me if I wanted to get involved, and I read their script, and that made me want to get involved. So yeah, a group of us sat down and figured out what these 10 episodes would be, and that took 6 or 8 weeks. And then we sat by and waited for something to happen. And the thing that happened was that Ryan Murphy got involved, and that sort of catalyzed the project.
What's amazing is that this show could have very easily been very tabloidy and trashy, but it really does. It's about all these really great themes, racism, sexism, the criminal justice system, the 24-hour news cycle, the world of entertainment. So as a writer, I mean, you've got all these different things to play around with, and in your 3 episodes in particular, they really are at the forefront, So when you were planning out what these 10 episodes were, I mean, was it like you were going to focus on a specific theme each episode, or I mean, how?
Well, it's interesting. We did think of it thematically initially. We did have these themes that we wanted to investigate, but we also had a timeline that we had to cover and events that we had to cover in a particular sequence. We were also very determined to be as accurate as possible, as truthful as possible about the events. And there was no shortage of totally crazy things that were true to get in there. There wasn't a lot, sort of, you didn't have to make, there's a lot of things you didn't have to make up. And we definitely, I mean, when Ryan came on board, he was very, very focused about theme, about, as you said, each episode having a really strong thematic drive. And so we got to investigate a lot of things through that perspective. Also, it has to be said, with the Black Lives Matter movement and the attention paid to that in the particular spectrum of the political justice system, that arrived when the show was forming itself. And if we had made the show a year earlier and it had arrived in the midst of that, it would have been different, and it wouldn't have been as good. We got the same wake-up call that everybody got, and that found its way into the show, hopefully.
I think it certainly did. I mean, the show opens with the Rodney King riots, which I thought was brilliant, setting it within the context of these really high racial tensions, and all of a sudden an icon of the Black community is arrested for murdering a white woman, which is something that's been, throughout this history of Black men being wrongfully accused of crimes against white women.
Very loaded.
I mean, yeah, exactly. So which brings us to the first episode that you wrote, The Dream Team, which is about the assembly of these A-list lawyers who are going to defend OJ. And it also introduces the element of race into their defense, saying that this was a arresting him was racially motivated. So can you talk a bit about that episode?
Well, I think that, the way I wrote it was the way I saw it, which from what I researched, which was that Robert Shapiro was a brilliant lawyer. And his particular area of expertise was creating consensus and creating deals between two sides and finding a middle ground that both sides could walk away from relatively happy with. But that would involve, in this case, possibly like a plea agreement, which O.J. Simpson was absolutely 100% not going to accept because he was absolutely 100% not guilty. So you have this, you have Cochran brought in, who is the opposite of Shapiro.
Mm-hmm.
He's an outsider. Shapiro's an insider. Cochran's an outsider. Cochran's made his life and his career from the outside. So while it was a dream team, it was this really fractious, very difficult group of people who initially worked very well together, but as the show goes on, you see how this this amicable nature disintegrates. So the dream team is really assembled in kind of a cynical way, as many legal teams are. Like, let's get this guy for this thing and this guy for that thing. And they had all the money in the world to do it. So they were totally outgunning the prosecution from the beginning. And what you see in this episode is the way things began to turn. There's so much evidence, and very early in the trial, this is true, very early in the trial, things began to turn from an overwhelming amount of evidence for the prosecution to and a favoring of the prosecution to the opposite. And that was something that I was trying to get across in that episode, the way this ship begins to turn itself in the opposite direction. By the end of 3, when Cochran is hired, Marcia Clark realizes that she's in for it.
Right, and that leads us into the next episode that you wrote, Marcia, which probably has the best bit of acting that Sarah Paulson's ever done.
Although that's a tough contest.
It is a tough contest. But
she's just incredible. She's like a superhero of acting, basically.
She is, yeah. I've loved her in everything I've seen. But this role really gave her a lot to work with, I think. And this episode in particular really highlighted all of the different nuances that she gets to play. And this is a woman who we've only really known from what we saw on TV. So talk about delving into that character and bringing out all these little different shades of gray. What kind of research did you do?
An enormous amount of research. For me, when I'm writing something, I have to fool myself into believing that I'm the master of that universe and that I know everything, even though that's not possible. And that's sort of stage one, so that when I write, I can feel like I can be truthful, even if I'm going into scene or dialogue that didn't actually exist. So I really got to know what Marcia Clark was like and what she was up against, and not just in the case, but in the world. Because it's interesting seeing what's going on with Hillary Clinton right now. And what was going on with Hillary Clinton at that time. There are interesting parallels. The way that our society has dealt with women, working women, and the things that they have to put up with has changed a lot. It's changed enough for the audience to look at this and go, "Oh my God, look at what this woman had to put up with." But it hasn't changed enough that the audience thinks that that's just ancient history, because it's really not dissimilar enough now. So, and I was raised by a woman who was working all day long and trying to love her children and hold down her home, also in a similar way. And I definitely watched my mother go through that stuff. And so I had a good resource on my hands, in my brain already. And it also has to be said that working with Sarah was a real partnership. Sarah doesn't just take the pages and go off and learn the lines and show up and do a great job. She is an incredibly intelligent, incisive dramaturg. You know, I swear to God, it's incredible. Like, she will take a page and go over it with me, and the conversation that we'll have will create totally new ideas or fine-tune ideas. And that's what I love to do. I love to give an actor everything they need to go and do the best thing that they could do. And so that happened really quickly. I mean, starting, because I was on set writing for the whole show, and starting, or after episode 2, and so starting in 3, she and I started to have that relationship. And I'm proud of the episodes I wrote, but there's no way that they would have been as good as they are if it hadn't been for the way she is in approaching material.
Mm-hmm. And it's really, it's heartbreaking what you see her go through in that episode. You know, for me, one of the most telling moments was when they have a focus group about how unlikable people find her to be, and they're commenting on her appearance. And I mean, you know, she goes to get this haircut, and people are making fun of that. I mean, it's just really, you know, it really highlights the fact that so much about this case was not about the actual case. It was about the media attention to it. So that element of it is really important too. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. Well, there's 2 things in what you said. One, the scrutiny of her, and the completely extra set of things that she had to attend to, which she never had before, ever. This public life was completely new to her, and it wasn't what she did. It wasn't why she was in the business. She was never a showboat. And so she had this, like I said, you know, she was already outspent, already not out-lawyered, but out-staffed. And then on top of that, she has to deal with this thing that nobody else in the case has to deal with. It's, you know, we presented it relentlessly because we had an hour to do it, and we had an hour to represent how relentless that was for a year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
I only answered half of your question. I can't
what was the other half of that?
I can't remember.
We talked about media scrutiny, and then we talked about her appearance being criticized. That's what it was. Yeah.
That's right. The media scrutiny. I mean, nothing had received the attention ever by the entire world like this did. This was the birth of, not the birth of the 24-hour news cycle, but it was the validation and supply of the first time that 24-hour news cycle was actually fed all day and all night, 24 hours a day, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, my God, look at it now, you know. It's like, not only is it, there's a 24-hour news cycle, but there's several networks devoted to a 24-hour news cycle. You know, one of the other great things about this show that it highlights as well are differences in economic class, you know, and Marcia being basically a public servant is way down on the totem pole, as opposed to like Johnny Cochran with his mansion and his big offices. You know, and she's a single working mother. You know, talk about writing about that kind of stuff as well, you know, showing those differences in their economic class.
You know, everybody else gets a break. Johnny Cochran goes home. You know, when you see Johnny Cochran go home, you see him tired, and he's put in a huge monster day of work, but he goes home to a really nice house, and he goes home to a really supportive, loving wife, and silk pajamas, and Marcia goes home to two children who've been missing her all day long and who want to be fed and want to be talked to and want to be read to. And that's all she wants to do too, you know? But she's what you point out is yet another example of how outgunned she is, you know? And by the way, like, if you look around, like, this is a huge problem we have in our country still. Not just the gender thing, but the underappreciation from a financial perspective of public service, lawyers, teachers, firemen, you know, you name it. These are the people that we pin the future on, and we don't look after them, you know, and she's a prime example.
Absolutely, yeah. The other thing that she's going through in the midst of this trial is a custody battle for her children. You know, again, I think that plays on this theme about how she's perceived by people, you know, because her husband makes the argument that it's not a stable living environment for the children. And I mean, that as well, having that drama, that personal drama in the midst of this courtroom drama, you know, how do you balance that as a writer?
Well, speaking of balance, I mean, when you bring that up, Marcia's not a perfect person, like,
right,
and not at all. I mean, and to me, a place to show that, or I felt responsible to show the balance with her husband's point of view, which is entirely valid. His point of view is, why am I paying for more babysitting when you're not around to cover you not being around? Why can't I just spend more time with our children? It's a point you cannot, there's no argument to that point, you know, and I made sure to get it in there because, you know, she wasn't operating from logic. She was operating from fear of losing her children, for a million understandable reasons, you know, but it was important. That was a great opportunity to once again show that she's not a perfect person, you know.
And I mean, you guys do that with all of the characters in this show. I mean, obviously OJ's not a perfect person, but
I'm gonna go with you on that.
But all of the characters are given these, there are no good or bad guys in this show. I mean, everybody has the best of intentions in what they're doing, but not everybody is motivated by the best of it, if that makes sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And certainly
everybody has their way of doing things, and they come with everybody has their massive insecurities and flaws, and those are wildly amplified by another thing you brought up, which is the media attention and the way the public was watching everything. We're sort of used to it now. Like the idea that if you're famous, you come out of a restaurant, people start taking your picture. Like that was reserved for movie stars and pop stars then, until then. So, or, you know, gangsters or criminals. So yeah, all of that just turned up the heat on all of those unique individual flaws which existed behind closed doors previous to that. Right. So that was really fun. It was so fun to pit insecurities against insecurities. F. Lee Bailey against Shapiro against Cochran, Darden against Cochran. You know, all those things were endlessly enjoyable to get into, and also all true.
Yeah, I mean, there is this amazing drama in this show, you know, and it's not just about, we all know what the outcome of the trial is going to be because we've lived through it. But I mean, seeing these little behind the scenes machinations and these turmoils, you know, like Darden versus Cochran, you know, these two people who've worked together and who respect each other, and all of a sudden they're pitted against each other. It's really fascinating stuff. So I want to talk about the last episode that you wrote, Conspiracy Theories, because, you know, again, media attention, the fact that everyone in the country had an opinion about whether or not OJ was innocent or guilty, and it all, the most famous aspect of that trial has to be the glove, not fitting. So talk about writing that episode.
That episode was really tricky because it was coming off of episode 6, which had this sort of I had a very clear idea of what I wanted to do. And again, you have the responsibility and also the structural gift of having to pay attention to the storyline that must, the case points from the case that must proceed in the timeline. But when it came to 7, we had these plot points that had to continue, but it was also a time when everyone involved was so spun out, so totally dysfunctional. And again, as we were talking about, like under this unprecedented magnifying glass. And so we wanted to explore, what happens when all their insecurities are being played out. Nobody trusts anybody. Suddenly, all of these things that might have been dismissed before take on real weight. Like this idea of what might be in OJ's bag, like that was a real thing. I don't know if it exactly happened at that point. I think it probably happened earlier, but it's an example I bring up because Kardashians die hard, and this is something I was trying to tend to the whole time. Kardashian's arc and this faith. We were always trying to show his choice of faith over fact, and the way he clung to it in his whole life in a very noble way. But you see, by that time in the story, everything is so frayed that when Shapiro brings up the bag, Kardashian doesn't say, "Well, that's ridiculous. There's nothing in that bag." He races home and has AC Cowlings meet him to be a witness to opening this bag. He's expecting to find something, either consciously or unconsciously. He's expecting to find something. Now, that's a created scene. That's not a scene that really happened that way, but it was a way I did it because it could be an example of how frayed that man's faith had become and how people could set each other off so easily. I mean, the whole thing about the glove was totally insane, And by the way, it was true. Like, a lot of people this show got fact checked in real time. Like nothing I've ever been involved. Like people watched this show with their laptops open, Googling, like fact checking, and that was such a great thing to think about because, as I said earlier, there are so many things in this story that are so crazy, but true, that it was great to know that we would get fact checked on something seemingly totally bizarre, and particularly in this episode because of conspiracy theories, and that they would come back as being real. The idea that Robert Shapiro had a idle moment in the courtroom and actually tried on the gloves, that sounds like absolute BS. And it happened. It was real. Like, how do you not put that in? And then the gloves become a symbol, not just a symbol as we all know it, but a symbol about trust. They become a symbol about who are you going to trust? Are you going to actually put these gloves on? Are you going to, from OJ's perspective, Darden's perspective, who are you going to trust? Marcia, who's saying don't do it? Or are you going to respond to your insecurities and your fears as ignited by F. Lee Bailey? Like, it's all coming apart at the seams. That's what the episode's about, as well as the conspiracies, and they're intertwined.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned people fact checking this show. I mean, I know that when I was watching it, all of my friends would, get on their computers at the same time after the episode to see, if this really happened. And this show really did create a phenomenon. It really was like a talking point for people and brought up a lot of things about this trial that I guess we had not thought about in a long time. So Are you going to be around for the next installment of American Crime Story? We forget this is a part of a anthology series. So
yeah, I am, and we're working on it right now.
mm-hmm. Can you give us any indication what it'll be about, or?
It's going to be about. It's going to be called American Crime Story Katrina.
Okay, yeah.
And it's going to be about the hurricane and the preparation for it, the response to it, the experience on the ground, and the aftermath to a certain extent. That's pretty much. That's the amount I feel comfortable saying now, because it's still very. It's being formed as we speak. You know.
That's a really interesting change of pace, you know.
I know.
Yeah, like totally. I expected something like the Menendez brothers, or you know.
Oh, I mean, you know, it's so funny. We spent a lot of time while we were shooting talking about like ideas would get run up the pole. You know, Menendez brothers, and Ryan would be like, no, you know, or Jean-Benet Ramsey, like all kinds of things, and they all seemed like lesser versions of OJ, because they're sort of in the same genre, but they're not. They don't. Excuse me.
Bless you.
They don't. Thank you. They don't have all of the stuff that we've been talking about. They just don't. They don't resonate culturally. They don't resonate outward. Culture doesn't resonate back at them, really. They're just sort of. You know, tantalizing on a very base level. And so, I ran a number of ideas up the flagpole, and up my own, and up Ryan's, and up, you know, but then one day Ryan said, you know, American Crime Story Katrina. And for me, I took a minute. I was like, do you know what that means? Like, do you know the kind of stuff that we're going to get into if we do that? And he said, yeah, that's what I want to do it. I was like, all right, I'm in. So it's going to be a very different kind of thing, but it's still going to retain, it's so much like OJ, it's just so filled with exciting, incredible things that are so impossible to believe, but are true. Yeah.
Well, I definitely can't wait to see that.
Me too. And we're gonna have a lot of our people back from. We're gonna really try and there's a lot of natural places for a lot of our cast from OJ to come in.
Awesome. Yeah. So lastly, I want to ask you. You know, we're an awards website, and we're right in the midst of Emmy season. A few years back, you received Writers Guild and BAFTA and USC Scripter nominations for High Fidelity. Back in the Emmy race this year, I just want to ask what that kind of recognition means for you.
Well, I'll say this: it's a very new area for me. Although I've you know, behind the scenes, I've written a million pilots, and I've, you know, done all kinds of stuff like that, and I've always been in love with the idea of what I could do in television versus a movie. But what I'd never experienced before was, you know, I've had movies come out, and I've seen the response, and then it's over. And to deal with something week after week, and to watch how the world reacts to it, has been so exciting to me. You know, it's been so gratifying, so much more gratifying than like going to the movie theater on Friday night and sitting in the back and watching an audience like or not like your movie, and then going home, and then it's over. You know, the weekend's over. This sort of ongoing interest in what we've done has been so immensely gratifying. I don't know how it's ever going to get this good again, but you know what I mean? I mean, this has been really, really something. And, you know, one thing that I really love about, you know, I don't really think about awards that much, but when I think about the Emmys, it makes me think about the intrinsic rewarding of teams. You know, more so than Oscars or BAFTAs. Or film awards. It's so much. It's such a group team effort to make a television show, and it's when it goes right, it is the cliche family experience. It really is. And so the idea of even being discussed in that way amongst my peers is really, I mean, it's exciting. I got to say, it's really wonderful. But it also it really makes me think about what we were like when we were shooting. That's the first thing it makes me think about. I don't know if that's illogical or not, but it makes me think about what we all did together. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make any sense to you?
No, it makes perfect sense. It does.
Right.
Well, thank you so much, and congratulations on your work.
Man, thank you so much. It's so lovely to be able to talk about it. You know, it's really great.
Thank you.
I really enjoy it. Yeah.
I love talking about it too. It's a really great show.
Thank you so much, man. Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
Okay, you too. I'll see you again.
See you again. Bye.
Okay, bye.